Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 12th edition of the SIG Network meeting. A reminder to everybody that this meeting is under the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, effectively boiling down to be nice to one another, so please be nice and courteous to one another. If you have questions and comments, try to use the raise hand feature in Zoom, as that's helpful for us to organize those questions and comments. We have an open agenda. We have a few things on the agenda for today, but if you have something that you want to add, please do. Remember to drop it in at the bottom, and we'll see if we can get to it today. Otherwise, we'll get started with triage and then get into our agenda items. All right, only one thing up for triage today specifically, and that is generic versus platform backend specific options in kube proxy. And it's assigned to me, so, oh, okay. Yeah, this was like meant to be a discussion. No discussion happened since we said that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying that this is old. I don't know why it put up on your list again. But now, I'm getting your internet connection is unstable. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. A little robotic.
So I submitted a possible KEP following up on this. And was like, hey, should we do this? And so people can comment on that. Yep.
Cool, thank you. Okay.
But that new KEP is not for 29, right? Yes. So yeah, we backburned it.
Right.
I did not review it for 29 because I recall, Dan, if you said it's not for this release. I think we lost Dan. Oh well.
Yeah, he seems to be.
I mean,
some trouble.
it's only the start of a KEP anyway.
Great, thank you. I'm in ruthless priority mode right now.
Roger that. Okay. Well, thank you for continuing on this. I know the discussion we thought would happen didn't really happen, but now it can in that PR. So if anybody, this was just take a look at this, especially if you're doing anything related to kubeproxy, and please comment on the KEP, give Dan some feedback. We would appreciate it. Also, I don't know if Dan can hear me because he's having internet issues, but while we're here, this is the first meeting where Dan is an official lead. Thanks for signing up to be a lead, Dan. You were basically doing the work already, but it's official now. So congrats to Dan. Thank you to Dan.
Thank you.
All right, Antonio, you wanted to demo Service Sitter?
Yes.
Go ahead and do it.
How can I get?
I'll give you co-host here.
Share the screen. Okay, let's say one.
And then actually I'll give Tim co-host too, just in case I drop off or something. That's been happening more and more lately.
Let's kubectl. I don't know, it's cider or not cider. Okay, so you have a snippet of the demo in the gist, in the agenda. And basically, this is a KEP that I've been working with the help of Tim, and it was Wojtek and Daniel Smith at the beginning. I think that we started in 2020 just to remove the limitation of the allocators, and we ended doing all this. That basically, right now, the Kubernetes cluster can define a service range. This is defined by flags on the API servers, and this removes this limitation and allows the people to configure these service ranges with service objects. So if you get, you have a cluster, you can see the service siders, that you have configured. These are the ones that are in the flags, right? When you create it, you are going to obtain the. You see my screen? I'm sharing. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so you can see that there is one special service either that is called Kubernetes. Okay, this then what is the problem that is solving? Imagine that you are a greedy customer and you want to save on IPs and say, I'm going to start small because I'm not going to have many services. So eventually you are going to have more of those services. So we are going to run this one-liner to create services. So we have a /28. So well, let me show something. We have already one service. That service has an IP address. And we have another service that is the DNS one. Okay, so we have two addresses allocated from this /28. So we are able to create only 12 services more. If I create 3 services, the last one is going to fail. So we are going to fill the range, and we can see that the last one cannot be allocated because it's full. So you can say we have all these IP addresses and all these services. Right now, this problem can only be solved if you shut down the API server, you change the flags, and you pray everything is correct when you boot the API server again. But with the service sider, you can create a new service sider. In this example, I'm going to add /24 because we want to create a new one. And this service sider is going to be created, and it's going to allow the API server to allocate new IPs. Get service siders, new sider one. It has a condition. You can see it has a condition about ready because it's going to be important in the later when I demonstrate. So now if we want to keep creating services, we ended on the 13, right? So let's say that we want to create another run of services. You can see these are allocated from the new service side, right? Then get service services, and each service has an IP address allocated. Okay, you can see this. The IP address reference the service. Okay, imagine that you are done and you want to remove the service sider because some reasons and other reasons. So you go and you delete the service sider. Delete service sider, new sider one. And you can see that it's hanging. It's hanging because the service sider has still allocated IP addresses from there. And it has a finalizer. Let me show you. Service sider. It has a finalizer that blocks the deletion because it has pending addresses. So it cannot be removed until all the IP addresses are removed. For doing that, we are going to delete all the services, I think from 13 to 20 that belong to that service side, right? And then now we should see siders. Okay, it is no longer present. And well, this is right now in review. There are several things that are not completely fleshed out. Next things that I need to add is multi-network. Sorry, multi-network. IP families and switching from one IP family to other and more complex things. But these are the now delete Kubernetes. Okay, qctl delete service Kubernetes. You can delete Kubernetes. That doesn't change. But
I meant the cider.
This cider service cider is going to hang because it has services. Do you want me to delete all the services?
Do it. Do it.
So let me go to this
Watch his
magic
cluster
screen.
explode.
Ah, this doesn't explode.
It's the weirdest
Okay.
heckling I've seen. Could you break your cluster while you're demoing, please? That would be great.
It
That would
cannot
help.
be deleted because it has
Just
it has
default
the
service.
default one.
Yeah, default service.
So now, and this
Cal
is
has a question for you, Antonio.
yeah.
No, I'll just let him go through the demo.
No,
and
Yeah,
then-
no,
I
delete
finished.
service. No, delete service Kubernetes now, and it should go away, right?
Yes. But it has something interesting. Service
We're
siders.
E to E testing live.
No, don't worry. I did that service, and I want to delete the service.
Now your API server is gonna start screaming because
No,
it cannot
no.
create. Oh, it creates the side. Okay, creates the side automatically.
It recreates the service side.
Yeah.
So it
Because
eventually
you have
gets
the
it
default
back.
cider. You have the default cider.
Yeah, we
But
don't have a watch on that, right? So it's like periodic.
yes, it's 30 seconds. So it should eventually we should have a Kubernetes service here, or you find a bug.
Oh, I believe you.
Eventually, this has to be recreated. And now I want to see what happens.
Wait, did you implement that yet? Recreating the Kubernetes service?
No, that is already
That's
implemented.
yeah.
I
it's
mean,
already there.
that's how it works today.
I thought it only did it at startup.
No.
There is
It's the
a-
same logic in everywhere. I mean, the logic, nobody thought about that. We came up with this logic because how things work is the API server will recreate the service if doesn't exist. It checks it every, I don't know how, what is the period?
I don't know. Dan seems to have the empirical backing.
Yeah, I don't know what is not being. So you are giving me work for now to debug why this is not happening. But it
This
should.
is my
He's gonna lose sleep over this, you know.
consider this my code review.
Yeah. Why I do these things? Okay, and that's. Well, you can do more things
Okay,
like
I-
switching from one family to another. That's more complicated.
This is again, as I said on the chat, this is sci-fi level stuff, all right? And I remember having these discussions long ago, and everybody was like, "Oh my god, this is just gonna be really hard to do." And the fact that we have that running even without the default services is just astounding to me.
Doesn't work.
Yeah,
So
and
thank
Yeah,
you.
good job, Antonio.
totally awesome. And there's more that you didn't really even demo here, right? Like overlapping ciders and deleting.
Yes.
You know,
that has another bug too, but okay,
sure.
yes.
This is why we do alphas, right? But to the audience and the recording, like the semantics of this implementation are actually like really subtle and kind of awesome. Like I think they will make people really happy.
I like it. I looked at the code and I like it. I have one question for you that after I read the code and we've done all that initial stuff, like I was thinking about this. There is no, I can create two ciders exactly the same way with two different names,
Yes.
right? And the system will not tell me, and this everything work, and I can delete one, right? And out because the system will see the other one is still there, so it's just in its mind, everything is fine, right?
Right. So that's the thing is, and this is the credit for Tim. He wanted to push on this idea of overlapping, right? So the important is the intersection, or is the
No, this is
intersection of
not
the union.
this is beyond the union of all the address spaces that we have.
Right.
This is I will create 10.0.0.0/8 twice with two different names.
But
Yes.
the feature was originally designed for, oh no, like your demo, Antonio, if I were redoing your demo, I would just use the same base, but expand the cider. Because I think that's what a lot of people are going to end up wanting to do. Which is specifically, we're allowed to have two ciders that overlap. and all of the CIDRs that sort of check into, or all of the services that check into those CIDRs are still valid as long as some CIDR covers them. And that way you could say, I started with a 20, but I started with a 26 and a 26 wasn't big enough. So I moved to a 24 and I deleted the 26, and the 24 wasn't big enough. So I moved to a 22 and I deleted the 24, and none of my services need to change because I continue to grow my service into adjacent space, which I think is just a super cool aspect of this.
You can even also, like, if you don't have services that are using the early addresses in the address space, you can move. Meaning, you can start with this, and then you keep moving until you get to where you want.
It's the magic Kubernetes
trickier.
one that is the trick, right? So the spec covers how it's supposed to work. Whether or not the implementation is fully done is a different question.
Okay.
Bravo, Antonio.
Well, now I just need to address the reviews, and so the goal, as you can see, is very complex. There are a lot of edge cases. The goal for me for this release is to have the very basic, so we can start to get feedback, because there are semantics that we want to implement right in the bootstrap menu on how the operators are going to use it that are not very clear, and I see how they can go one way or the other, but it will be better if we validate these assumptions with real feedback from people using the feature. So the goal for this release is to have the building blocks, right? These controllers, these behaviors, and then in the next release, keep being in alpha and just start to polish all these small details of, how do we want to do this? How do we want to do the other? And that's it. Okay, I don't have anything else.
Awesome, and thank you. Next up, we have Dave Protosowski, who is one of our great contributors over at Gateway API, wants to talk about gateway routability and multi-network. So I'll give you co-host if you need to share. Dave, and then
I can start the discussion. Actually, good timing that Matthew joins.
I am here, so I'm right on time, I think.
Yeah, you are. Awesome. I can fill in the historical context. So one of the features Knative likes to use is this concept of visibility. So for example, we create routes and Knative services, and some of them are just cluster local. And the way we accomplish that is because we can configure various ingresses to just be kind of like an in-cluster proxy and not exposed to the public internet. And with Gateway, we wanted to have the same functionality, but make it be sort of portable. The ability to create gateways that are only essentially cluster local. That kind of like morphed into this routability gap. And the routability gap sort of defines the routability of a gateway. There's some constants defined. One is cluster, another one is like public and private. And I believe at the last API review, was kind of said, hey, hold on, public and private are scary. What does that mean with multi-network? So forth and so forth. So reached out to Mache, went to the multi-network meeting, kind of chatted about it. And I think his take there is that gateways, it makes sense to assign potentially like a pod network, have a one-to-one mapping to such a thing. But with respect to, which currently Gateway doesn't do, but I think that's sort of like out of scope for the gap for routability. But the suggestion was routability really defines load balancer implementation semantics. So I think the feeling there is like the routability gap is compatible with like the future work for pod network. And then thus I'm kind of like resurfacing up that tidbit of info to see if, and I think everyone's here, so we could chat about it. Mache, do you feel like I've expressed your
Yeah,
sentiment?
and this is just to let everyone knows, this is the sentiment that we would like to move towards with multi-network and gateway APIs, which I don't want to set in stone yet. And then like, oh yeah, that's how it's going to be in the future. But because this is something that we are not there yet to discuss about, we want to kind of David pushes us towards that discussion right away, but I'm trying to kind of defend myself from it because we are not there yet to talk about it so much. I know we want to kind of know the idea or what we would like it to look like. So this is what David kind of says, right? That's what we think it could look like in the future. Whether we all agree on that today, I don't think we have to, but I just want to make sure that it's okay. Yeah, that's what it's going to be. End of the story, right? And we decided within our smaller group. No, that's what we are thinking of. And with that sentiment to whatever David wants to try to do here, I don't think it should impose on what we think with multi-network would do in the future, right? So that's kind of another aspect of this. Yeah, team.
So the question that I have, thank you for exploring this. The question that I have around this routability is, you think of a load balancer as sort of having two legs. There's the back ends and the front ends. The back ends being on a given pod network makes sense. The front end is somewhere else. And what I hate about public, private, internal, external is that's ambiguous. Where is it? Is it between virtual networks? Is it between the internet and my pod network? Is it between companies across a wide area network? Like, all of these things are viable gateway implementations. Public or external doesn't characterize that well.
I tend to agree with Tim. I'm not trying to like pile on, but I do tend to agree with Tim on this one. And in particular, the language around public and the get currently, like there will be clusters that don't even talk to the public internet and it's not applicable. That's just like a smaller thing. The semantics here are really, they'll work for some cases, but I don't think we're in a 90% case kind of situation where this will work for 90%. If we were closer to that, I think I'd feel less strongly.
If I can put it, oh, sorry, there's a whole lot of hands. Let's do those first.
Oh, you were fine. I just wanted to clarify that the feedback I'm hearing now is taking this away from multi-network and making this like just focused on internal and external being more vague, harder to define than we'd like. Is that a fair assessment? Just to make sure I'm focusing on the right thing.
I think so. I buy the argument that multi-network isn't really the consideration here. Multi-network is specifically concerned with pod networks, right? Okay, so one leg of the load balancer or gateway implementation is in one of the pod networks. Where that is defined is unclear, but it's probably implementation specific. I'm concerned now with if we're adding API surface that sort of pretends that it can define the other leg. I'm not sure I buy it yet. So, or put another way, this is kind of what gateway class was supposed to encapsulate. Configuration that isn't generic, that you have to understand the implementation to define, right?
But yeah, that was one of the alternatives considered.
Won't that make, that's where I was thinking, like you said, public versus external or private, won't that be just a matter of how you implement this? And basically it is relative, and this is what I'm trying to get to, right? And then it's, even if I have a cluster that is disconnected from internet, is isolated, maybe within that environment I have public and external, right? And
yeah,
I define
absolutely.
what that is. Is that a problem? Why would that be a problem from the API point of view, right? Won't that be boiling down to your implementation and how you set up your environment? Why
So
or we do say it has to be explicitly, it always has to be, the API has to explicitly say what it is. That's
who
where
are you asking, me or Dave?
I'm asking probably you, Dave's trying to have just this differentiation, but I'm asking you, why does the API has to be so explicit about it?
So right now, the way public is written, it says exposed to the internet, right?
Oh,
Which,
okay.
okay, so let's say that it was exposed to some other network. Which other network? Where do I set that? How do I know which other network? Is it between two private networks? Like if I'm in a cloud, can I have a load balancer between two different VPC networks? If I'm in a corporate environment, do I have a special route across the WAN? Like, where is that defined? Clearly, there's some other place where this configuration is going. Where is that? And why is it in two places now?
But to your point, an API concept needs to have a consistent meaning across all the implementation. How it's realized can be different, but an API construct must have a consistent meaning across everything. Otherwise, somebody writing a code against the API might get a different behavior from one cluster to another.
That's right. And making this be sort of an orthogonal distinction separate from gateway class, right, worries me in that I don't know that a public and a private implementation actually have the same capabilities, right? Like it seems plausible that my internal implementation, well, I'll pick on Google. Like I know some of our internal implementation doesn't have the same capabilities as our external implementation. We don't have any cast internal. Okay, so if I want a global thing and I change it from public to private, my semantics change dramatically. Like, is that okay to be buried here? Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's, I agree. I think one of the things that we had explored here was having this on gateway class. I think that's fine. I think what, in my opinion, is the most useful part of this is the addresses in status having some kind of hint of how they are routable. And so I'd say, back when I was using Kubernetes more as an end user, I found nodes external and internal IP concept remarkably useful. I recognize that is hard to define, as Antonio has called out. There's some variation there, but just as an end user, I found it very useful to have these kind of broad buckets of this is an internal IP, this is an external IP. I recognize there's some variation across environments, but at least for me, it was easy to understand the concept, right? That's, I think, what I would love to see happen in Gateway. Just some kind of bucket that exists that allows us to define this class or category of address. I'm less concerned about where exactly the user configures it. We can figure that out later. I feel like having some way to describe this category that is common across many providers
So
would be,
I hear that, and I totally get the distinction between internal and externals specific to the Knative case, right? The problem with making the analogy to like the node internal external addresses is node internal external addresses is a disaster of an API, in that if I have a node that has two NICs that are on two different networks and they're both using RFC 1918 addresses, I know nothing about where they're reachable from, right? Or what that means. They're both internal addresses. Does that mean they're fungible? Clearly not, right? So I'm afraid that implementation is like super naive. It comes from a time when Kubernetes was much less sophisticated than we're trying to make it now. And I would really not like to make the same mistakes. I'm totally cool with making new mistakes, but let's not make the same ones.
Back in my day, the nodes were called minions.
That's right. A minion has the same number of letters as master, so it was very convenient. I don't know who had a hand up. Dave?
I think Dave did. I could be wrong. Go ahead, Dave.
Antonio had his hand. Put it down. Antonio.
No, I put it down.
So for me, I think like ideal world, gateway class lists the routabilities it supports, which is kind of what's highlighted here. So then as a user using a gateway class, I know what fields, what values I can put there. The way I was landing conformance for this is like public and private are like opt-in and cluster as well. Like there's separate conformance for different routabilities if you opt into those. I feel like the only one I really care about is cluster in this scenario. And like I necessarily don't need a constant for private, and I don't need the public constant. Because I understand everyone's point of view, but from like an end user perception, like how do I get a gateway and know that I can hit it using an external IP that is accessible on like the public internet, like kind of like, which is the default assumption for a Kubernetes service type load balancer, right? At least in some scenarios, depending on the annotations.
So yeah, it used to be the
like,
assumption.
Yeah.
It was the assumption until all the cloud providers got involved, and now it is no longer the assumption, because at least in some cloud providers, there are annotations that say, no, do this via internal. And even internal is ambiguous. And like now I'm starting to see people encoding configuration into that annotation, which says, which internal does it mean? And so again, the service load balancer is a naive implementation that is now like no longer satisfying the sophistication requirements, which is why gateway is so important in my opinion.
So I feel like your ask about why is this in gateway class, essentially I think because gateway class services its routabilities, it can be used that way. Essentially,
so there's the question I have is whether routability is truly orthogonal to a gateway class or whether it is actually embedded in the gateway class. Like one option here is I have gateway class knative internet, knative private. And when I create my gateway, I choose which class I want. And from an infrastructure point of view, they probably have a lot of duplicative configuration, but it's very clear when I'm a customer of the cluster, a user of the cluster, I can say, I can go shopping for gateway classes and I can see in their names, and maybe we need a description or something, and a product code or barcode or something, that I can see what am I getting when I use this class. If we thought, and I'm open to this idea, if we thought that routability or scope or attachment, I don't know what the right word is, don't let me name stuff, that's how you end up with gateway. If we thought that was properly orthogonal to which infrastructure category, then we could do that, but I wouldn't call them public and private. I would say, here's a list of attachment scopes that this class is allowed to specify. And then as a user, I have to say, I want this class, and these are the parameters that I'm setting for my connection.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when if we drop public and private, then cluster I think makes sense to me, meaning that's just on the pod network, I guess, or using the server-side IPs. I think the question has come up, if we drop public and private, what's the alternative there? Because
you have a different class. I mean,
no, I think.
Go ahead, Rob.
Rob's
Sorry,
been waiting very patiently. Yes.
Yeah, I think what Dave is getting at, and I've had the same conversation several times of it. Right now, we're proposing an enum, right? We understand what it means to basically have a cluster IP right here, but what's the alternative, right? We don't want to just have a bool of cluster IP, but so we have an enum. But what you just have cluster and other, like I don't know how you define those other characteristics. What I'm particularly concerned about here is that it feels like we may be, making perfect the enemy of the good, for lack of a better, I know that there are variations. I absolutely get it. But I just feel like right now, the current state of the world is, if someone wants to configure this on service type load balancer, they reach into their bucket of cloud specific, vendor specific annotations and pick out their own, and it, like, there's no portability at all, even though the concept itself feels at least conceptually portable. I recognize it's not as portable as and as consistent as many things, but it just, from somebody looking from the outside in that may not be as much of a networking expert, I feel like they would understand this high level broad bucket if we were allowed to do that. I don't want to get too stuck on that though, so I'm also open to the idea of, let's just define cluster and have some other alternative, but I don't know what the other alternative is. That other alternative just becomes this really broad bucket. And I think, sorry, one last thing. I think, Tim, you were describing the idea of Knative gateway classes, one external and one private, or something like that, right? But I think the thing that distinguishes Knative is they build on top of gateway implementation. So they're trying to discover the routability or whatever of implementation. So like they kind of need to rely on something like more than just a naming pattern in gateway classes, or we could define a naming pattern that every gateway class should follow, but that could be more problematic.
I want to answer, but Shane's first.
What's that?
I said I want to answer, but Shane's first.
Oh, actually, I had my hand up for a while, and I feel like all I was gonna to do was get into like, okay, what if you have a mesh, and then like, what if you can only get to the gateway from within the mesh, and the mesh is multi-cluster? Like, but we don't have a whole lot of time left, and we still have another item. So you go ahead, Tim. There's going to be a lot more conversation, I think, that has to happen around
Yeah,
this.
there's a whole lot of what ifs here, right? So to the argument of building on top of gateway, we have all sorts of metadata decorations that you can use for Knative, right? You can throw an annotation or a label on the gateway class that says this is for use by Knative, and Knative should expose it as name public and name private. And when you go do something through Knative and you specify whatever the noun that Knative uses, I apologize for not being super familiar. Then you map it into labels or annotations or some other mechanism that way. Like, that can still be transparent to the user. I lost my other thought. Shoot.
Alternatives.
Oh, I don't understand why, if cluster is a necessary aspect of this, being able to say which cluster you want, like, I still don't see it in the gateway itself, because it still feels like a question of the class. Like, I guess, who decides what's available in a cluster, right? It's the cluster owner who decides. It's the same with storage classes, right? And with storage class, we were always pretty careful to say that the classes were qualitative more than quantitative, right? So you could have gold, silver, and bronze, or you could have purple, pink, and yellow, and it didn't matter, because as a cluster administrator, that was the API that you're surfacing to your cluster consumers. Gateway class, I think, feels this same way. If you want to say this gateway class is connected to the prod network, then you would call it prod something, prod L7, right? And if I want a gateway, and I would say connect to the gateway class prod L7, which has some known configuration defined that says connect me to the prod network. I don't know what the prod network is. I don't know what that means, but it means that my gateway is available on the prod network. And if I have one that says internet L7, then I would choose that one, because it's pretty clear what that means, right? As opposed to saying, well, this is public and this is private. And so if you want a cluster internal one, you have one that's called, internal -L7 or private L7 or cluster L7, whatever the right wording that you want for your environment is.
I think where this is coming from, in my opinion, is that 90+% of implementations of Gateway API today are in cluster implementations, usually deployed in cluster and usually deployed behind a service of type load balancer. And what most implementations are doing is they're just creating a service type load balancer. And some people would rather just have a service type cluster IP in front of that, right? That's it, right? And this is Dave trying to find a generic way to ask for that instead of talking to every implementation individually and coming up with their own like unique annotation, gateway class param, whatever it happens to be, to do that differently. I don't know what the answer is, but I'd hate to see this done, 20 different ways for every in-cluster gateway implementation that exists today.
Like, do we feel like we could have cluster as an enum, but the field is optional, and then when it's not set, it's just whatever?
It's not clear to me that applies to other classes. Like if I'm building a class that's implemented in terms of a cloud internet-facing Anycast load balancer, and I set this enum to cluster, I don't even know what that means.
Then I would expect your gateway to fail to be accepted.
Like why would we factor the API in a way that gives users a pit filled with sharp bamboo and then encourage them to walk on the path, but say don't step here?
But I guess like also a gateway class could define for the IaaS different routabilities, right? That is essentially useful. So then you could have AWS public IP or external, I don't know what to call it. You could do AWS VPN as a routability that's like prefixed. You could do similar things with GCP.
So I think there's like
cluster wouldn't be a valid enum in those instances.
Yeah,
so I'm more interested in the mechanic, right, rather than the semantics. But the only semantic I care about is cluster. So
yeah, I mean, I think to go down that path a little bit further, one of the ideas we described was gateway class status could describe the routabilities or whatever we want to call it that gateway class supports, right? So this gateway class supports cluster and public. Take whatever name you choose. Maybe it's implementation specific. And then you can choose to request one of those on a gateway. And if it doesn't line up with what's in gateway class status as the supported values, then you just can't use it. I don't know.
We need to time box this because I know we have another topic, but I'll end with this. There's an info theory thing here, right? Like there's a certain number of information bits that we need to have. Whether we put them here or we put them there or we make them dependent on some other thing doesn't really matter. We're not actually like abstracting anything here, right? And so given that, we should factor it in a way that is grouping the most related bits the most. And it seems like putting something in the gateway that depends on information in the gateway class is taking highly coupled information and moving them to two separate places. Whereas I could put it in the gateway class and I could say, yeah, you have two gateway classes and you choose which one you want. All the information you need is in one specific class. I'm open to the idea that within a gateway class, there are like substanzas. I don't want to call them subclasses, but some secondary configuration that you're choosing, which is this, right? But I would really want to see why that is a better UX than simply having multiple classes.
I think the status fields displaying like essentially the capabilities of the gateway class and then users understanding that to construct gateways is pretty powerful. And then to your point, you can limit it to a single thing, but then you're essentially just moving those options into embedding into the gateway class name, right? So I feel like it's all sort of the same, but I'm opting for more structure than just gateway class name.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss. I know we need to yield the floor to the next topic.
Yeah, we're getting into the last 8 minutes here. Thank you for bringing this up, Dave and Mache, and it's definitely giving me a lot more to think about. I'll chew on this a bit. It does seem like we'll need to have follow-up conversations, whether those are asynchronous or synchronous. If nothing else, do some more thinking about it yourself, and then see if maybe there's something we can put on for the next meeting to talk a little bit more about it. Ideally, we could do some more asynchronous discussion of it.
Yeah, so I have a PR with a comment about the multi-network, so maybe that could be the place to do async discussion.
Roger that. So that's Gateway API 2441.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely personally think about it a little bit more. This is giving me a lot to chew on.
I think this conversation was helpful in that it shifted the focus from what we had said was, okay, multi-network intersection is problematic, to maybe that's not the thing, and maybe it's just there are hard to define terms in here. Yeah, okay.
For what it's worth, what we're trying to do has not been done before, as far as I know. Like if you go to any network configuration equipment or anything that existed at the dawn of time, everything is IPs and CIDRs and just that. And though maybe you can find a tag somewhere that says external, right, in some devices or some equipment or even some clouds. But really, most of the networks are defined as CIDRs and subnets, and that's it. So this is hard stuff. It's not easy stuff. And we can also blame them, because at the end of the day, this is sins of our fathers. They didn't solve that early on, so
I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get back to it in future iterations. Rob, go ahead and talk about Gateway V1.
Yeah, despite what this looks like, it's actually a really quick thing, at least for me to talk about. One, there's slides there. We presented those at the Gateway meeting on Monday. They provide an overview of all the changes we're trying to include in the 1.0 release of Gateway API. That release is something that we are targeting to have ready and released by the end of this month, which is coming up awfully soon. That means we are targeting a RC1, a release candidate, on Monday. So 3-4, not many days from now. We would benefit from any and all reviews on this PR. This PR is basically a diff of our API's spec and some corresponding validation that has changed between 0.8 and 1.0. And anyone and everyone are welcome to review. Any reviews are very appreciated on this. Well, because this is the 1.0 release, we're trying to especially make sure it is in good shape. So if you see things in there, please do let us know. I will say the majority of changes in this release are indeed experimental changes. So that means they're new experimental features. They're not actually GA things. But we are taking the existing gateway class and HP route resources and graduating them to GA as part of this release. But yes, please, any and all feedback is very, very welcome here. We've been doing a lot of review in our own little bubble of the Gateway API sub-project, but would appreciate some new eyes or returning eyes to take another look. We've always gotten good feedback out of these reviews. So yeah, that's it.
Sounds good. And with that and no other agenda items, please do Gateway API 2466 if you have an interest. So go and review there. As Rob asked, we appreciate that. But with nothing else, we'll give everybody back 4 minutes of their day, and we'll see you next time.
Can I ask one last question?
Yeah, go for it.
We have one more SIG meeting before KubeCon. We should have a group get together for lunch or something one of these days. So anybody Anybody want to volunteer to coordinate a lunch? I don't know, like even where to meet. So somebody will need to be doing maybe like day of, hey, let's meet by the statue in the west atrium where the snowman is built or whatever.
The
You know,
SIG Network lunch.
right. I'm remembering Spain where we're like, meet at the one statue that's over by room B, right? And so like, there's some amount of coordination that needs to happen. Anybody want to volunteer?
No, but the last 2 times we stormed the meet and greet thing.
Yeah, we could
know-
do that too. I mean, I kind of like having a place where we can just all pat each other on the back and have a chit chat which doesn't involve random people coming up to our SIG to say, what does SIG networking do?
Matter of
Yeah,
fact,
we keep the electricity up. Like, yeah, your lights is on. What do you want?
Everybody bring a switch or a router or something.
I think what we've done in the past has almost always been lunch on the last day of the convention. And last time and this time that has overlapped with the meet the contributors session. I'm fine to combine. I'm fine to do. I don't care, but
It doesn't even have to be a lunch. Like it could just be, hey, this looks like a boring set of talks at 11:25 to 11:45. So let's all get together just to say hello.
yeah,
But
that sounds good.
I would love to do it. I'm overwhelmed between now and KubeCon with the amount of stuff that I have to pull together. So I'm asking if somebody wants to volunteer. Nobody.
I can help. I can help with that.
Mr. Stoikos being very quiet today, but stepping up.
I had a
Thank you.
nosebleed, so I had to keep the camera off, but it's good now. I'll try to plan it. Do you care if it's kind of like as we go into the week of KubeCon, or do I need to architect this before?
I don't care. I just didn't want to think of it like, a week before we all get there or 5 days before we get there and being like, oh crap, we need to plan.
Okay. Sounds good. Maybe next meeting I'll try and find some spots in a day and make a little doodle or something. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. And we just
It's
send it
good
out
if-
like, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's good if by next meeting, everybody at least knows where the plan is going to be, so that like when we all get to KubeCon, we're like, oh, do I have to check the mailing list or do I have to check Slack or,
Okay. Do you have a
plan
preference?
for a plan.
Do you have a preference, mailing list or Slack, anyone?
my preference would be the mailing list.
Mailing
Okay.
list.
Got it. Cool. I'll start something.
Thank you, Andrew.
Cool.
It was-
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're ending on time. Have a good one, and we'll see you in a couple weeks before KubeCon.
Bye.
See you.